My name is Greg Dalton. I built my life on discipline, strategy, and control. Skills I honed in the military and later used to create a successful private security business. I thought I understood danger, that I could see every threat coming before it had a chance to strike. But I was wrong. The real betrayal wasn't on the battlefield. It wasn't an enemy with a gun. It was something far more personal. It was my best friend, the man I trusted like a brother. It was my wife, the woman I swore my life to. Together, they had been plotting behind my back, thinking I was too blind, too loyal to ever suspect a thing. They weren't just having an affair, they were planning to take everything from me. My company, my future, my pride. They thought I wouldn't see it coming. They thought they had already won. But what they didn't realize was that I had spent my life preparing for war, and now the battle was mine to win. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss new stories. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, it really helps. And don't forget to share your thoughts in the comments. Let's discuss. I've always believed in control, in discipline, in the idea that if you work hard enough, stay sharp enough, and watch your own back, nothing can touch you. That was the military in me. The part of me that had been molded through years of combat, of split-second decisions that meant the difference between life and death. When I left the service, I didn't lose that mindset. I built a business around it. A private security company, specializing in high-risk clients, corporate protection, and intelligence gathering. My entire world revolved around anticipating danger before it arrived, identifying threats before they could strike, ensuring that no one ever got close enough to do real damage. I had spent a lifetime preparing for attacks, but I never expected the one that would cut the deepest to come from inside my own home. For years, I thought my life was solid. I had a thriving business, a strong reputation, and a woman I loved. Allison was the kind of woman who could command attention just by walking into a room. She wasn't just beautiful, she was magnetic, the kind of person people gravitated toward. She had a way of making you feel like you were the only one who mattered, and for a long time I thought I was the man lucky enough to have that devotion all to myself. We had been married for nearly 10 years, built a life together, supported each other through the highs and lows, or at least, that's what I believed. Then there was Trevor Miller, my business partner, my brother in arms. We had served together, bled together, survived things that most people couldn't even begin to imagine. After the military, we had built something real, something powerful, a company designed to protect people, to anticipate danger before it struck. I had always considered Trevor family, someone I could trust without hesitation. And that's what made it all the worse. It started with little things. Allison had always been independent, but lately she was always busy. Business dinners, charity events, weekend spa retreats. At first, I didn't question it. She had always had an active social life, always had things going on, but something about the way she carried herself started to shift. She became more guarded, more careful. The way she held her phone, tilted away from me, the way she'd silence it the moment I walked into the room, the way she smiled at me, polite, rehearsed, but missing something I couldn't quite place. And then there was Trevor. He had always been confident, but lately there was something else beneath it. A tension in his shoulders, a forced ease in the way he spoke. He was around less, canceling meetings at the last minute, brushing off conversations we used to have easily. He avoided eye contact more than usual. The more I noticed, the harder it became to ignore. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. That after years in the military, after years of analyzing risks and assessing threats, maybe I was just seeing things that weren't there. But the feeling didn't go away. If anything, it got worse. And then, one night, everything started to unravel. I had stayed late at the office, going over a last-minute contract for a high-profile client. The building was quiet, most of my employees already gone for the night. As I locked up my office, I noticed something strange. A faint glow of light coming from Trevor's office down the hall. That was odd. He had left hours ago, or at least, I thought he had. Curiosity got the best of me. My footsteps were silent on the carpet as I approached, my training kicking in instinctively. The door was slightly open, just enough for me to hear voices coming from inside. And that's when I heard her voice. "Allison." My body went still. A cold sensation crept up my spine as I stood in the shadows, listening. "He doesn't suspect a thing," she said, her voice carrying an edge of amusement. A beat of silence, then Trevor spoke. "Of course he doesn't. The guy's too busy playing soldier, running this company like it's a goddamn war zone. He thinks he's in control of everything." I clenched my jaw. My pulse remained steady, but inside, something fractured. I didn't storm in. I didn't make a sound. Instead, I took a slow step back, inhaling through my nose. The military had taught me a lot of things: patience, restraint, the ability to read between the lines. This wasn't just an affair. It was something big. I left the building without them ever knowing I had been there. I walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and sat in silence, my hands gripping the wheel. My mind was racing, calculating, processing. They weren't just sneaking around behind my back. They were planning something. I didn't know what yet, but I was going to find out. I drove home that night in silence, the weight of what I had heard pressing down on me like an anchor. The words kept repeating in my head over and over again, each time cutting a little deeper. He doesn't suspect a thing. The guy's too busy playing soldier. He thinks he's in control. The sheer confidence in their voices was what got to me the most. They weren't nervous. They weren't afraid. They truly believed they had me fooled, that I was some blind, oblivious idiot who would never see what was happening right in front of me. I walked into my house like nothing had changed. Allison was already home, curled up on the couch with a glass of wine, scrolling through her phone like she had no care in the world. She looked up at me with a smile, the same smile she had given me for years, the one I used to think meant love. Now it felt like a mask. "Long day?" she asked casually, stretching her legs out on the couch. I nodded, forcing a tired sigh. "Yeah, lot of last-minute paperwork." She nodded like she cared, like she wasn't counting down the minutes until she could sneak off and whisper secrets to my so-called best friend. I watched her for a moment longer, wondering how long she had been lying to my face, how many times she had come home to me straight from his arms, how many nights I had kissed her, touched her, held her, while she was thinking about him. I wanted to ask. I wanted to see her reaction, to watch her try to lie to me again, but I held back. This wasn't the time. In war, the worst mistake you could make was acting on emotion. The ones who let anger cloud their judgment were the ones who didn't make it back home. I wasn't going to be one of them. Instead, I started gathering intel. The next morning, I went into work like it was any other day. I walked into my office, greeted my employees, checked my emails, went over the usual reports. I even had a casual conversation with Trevor, who grinned at me like nothing had changed, like he wasn't screwing my wife behind my back. He joked about a potential new client, made plans to grab drinks over the weekend. I nodded along, playing my part. But inside I was watching, studying. I checked the security footage from our office cameras, scrolling through the last few weeks. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Trevor and Allison alone in his office, standing too close, whispering. I scanned through different days, different times. The same pattern. Her car in the parking lot late at night. Him leaving the building hours after I had already gone home. The evidence was piling up, but I wasn't done yet. I needed to know how deep this went. I hired a private investigator, someone I trusted outside of my company, someone who wouldn't leave a trail back to me. I gave him one task: follow them. Track every meeting, every interaction, find out where they went when they thought no one was looking. I wasn't just looking for proof of an affair. I was looking for motive. Affairs happened for all kinds of reasons. Some people got bored, some people wanted an escape, but this didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like a plan. And I was right. Within a week I had everything I needed. Hotel reservations under fake names, bank statements that didn't match up, late-night meetups in places that weren't just about sex. And then the real bombshell: financial discrepancies in my own company, money being funneled out through shell accounts. Accounts that, surprise, surprise, had Trevor's fingerprints all over them. That was when everything clicked. This wasn't just an affair. This was a setup. Trevor wasn't just sleeping with my wife, he was using her to manipulate me, to keep me distracted while he slowly took control of everything I had built. And Allison, she wasn't just cheating, she was helping him. The betrayal settled deep in my bones, but I didn't let it show. Not yet. I went home that night, sat across from her at the dinner table, listened to her talk about her day like everything was normal. I nodded in all the right places, smiled when I was supposed to, and when she kissed me goodnight, I kissed her back, my mind already working 3 steps ahead. They thought they had me fooled. They thought I didn't see it coming. They had no idea what was about to happen next. I spent the next few days reinforcing my plan, making sure every move I made was calculated, deliberate. Patience was key. If I wanted to dismantle them, I couldn't afford to act impulsively. I needed them to believe they were still in control. That meant maintaining my routine, keeping my expressions neutral, playing the part of the clueless husband and trusting business partner. I made sure Allison saw me as the same predictable man she had always known, the one who worked long hours and barely noticed when she came home late. I let Trevor think our friendship was still intact, that I valued his advice, that I still considered him my brother. I even invited him for a drink after work, listened to him joke about our latest contracts, watched him laugh like he wasn't stealing from me behind my back. But behind the scenes, I was pulling the strings. The first thing I did was start locking Trevor out of the company slowly and quietly. If I moved too fast, he would catch on. If I made it obvious, he might try to cover his tracks or, worse, disappear before I had the chance to take him down properly. So I played it smart. I started by reviewing the company's financial structure with my legal team, looking for any vulnerabilities he could still exploit. I had already frozen certain accounts, but I needed to make sure there were no back doors, no hidden assets that he could use as leverage. Every fraudulent transaction, every unauthorized withdrawal, every missing dollar, by the time I was done, I had a file thick enough to make sure he wouldn't just lose the company, he'd lose everything. Allison was next. I went through our joint finances, tracking every expense she thought I wouldn't notice. The credit card bills, the withdrawals, the deposits into accounts I had never seen before. She had been moving money, funneling it away in small amounts, thinking she was being discreet. But I saw it. I saw everything. Expensive gifts, high-end hotels, reservations at places I had never been invited to. She was planning something. Maybe an escape, maybe a future with Trevor, maybe just a safety net in case things went south. Whatever it was, she wasn't going to get what she wanted. The hardest part was staying quiet. Every morning, I woke up beside a woman who had betrayed me, smiled at a man who had stabbed me in the back, pretended I was still the same man they had underestimated. I sat across from Allison at breakfast, listened to her tell me about her day, let her kiss me goodbye as if nothing had changed. I went to work and shook Trevor's hand, let him believe he was still running the show, let him think he was still one step ahead. It was exhausting, but I had been through worse. In the military, I had learned how to suppress emotions, how to stay calm under pressure, how to wait for the perfect moment to strike. And that was exactly what I was doing. Then came the final piece. My private investigator had been tracking them for weeks, collecting evidence, piecing together their movements. He had already given me more than enough proof of their affair, more than enough to ruin them both, but I needed something bigger, something that would break them completely. And then one afternoon, he handed me a final report. A recorded conversation. Trevor and Allison. Alone in his car. I sat in my office, listening to their voices crackle through the speakers, my fingers clenched into fists. "I'm telling you, it has to be soon," Trevor said, his voice low, urgent. "If we wait too long, he's going to start asking questions." "He hasn't noticed anything," Allison assured him. There was a lightness in her tone, like she wasn't talking about betraying her husband, but discussing something as casual as dinner plans. "Greg doesn't think like we do. He's too loyal." Loyal. That was the word she used to describe me, like it was a flaw, like it was the reason they thought they could get away with this. I played the recording again, and then again, letting the words sink in. letting the last remnants of whatever feelings I had for either of them dissolve completely. They had already written me off. They had already decided I was weak, that I wouldn't see it coming, that I wouldn't be able to stop them. They thought they had won. They had no idea I was already 3 steps ahead, and soon they would find out exactly what it meant to betray a man like me. I spent the next week setting the final pieces in place. Every move I made had to be perfect. There was no room for error, no second chances. Trevor and Allison had spent months, maybe longer, thinking they were ahead of me, that they were the ones in control. They had no idea they had already lost. The first thing I did was make sure Trevor had no way out. My lawyers had already locked down the company's finances, but I needed him to feel safe. I needed him to believe that everything was still going according to plan, so I played the part. I met with him every day, discussed future contracts, pretended to value his input. I even made it seem like I was relying on him more than ever, telling him I had been stressed, overwhelmed, and grateful to have him handling so much of the workload. I watched his ego swell, saw the way he straightened his shoulders when I mentioned how much I trusted him. He thought he had me exactly where he wanted me. And then, on Friday afternoon, I gave him what he thought was the final piece of his victory: a contract. One that would officially transfer a significant portion of my shares in the company to him under the pretense of restructuring. I played it off as a long-term strategy, a move to make the business stronger. He didn't even hesitate. He signed without question, without looking deeper. He thought he had just secured his place, that he had finally pushed me out of my own company. What he didn't know was that the contract was a trap. A carefully worded legal maneuver that didn't transfer power to him. It stripped him of it entirely. The moment his signature hit that paper, he was no longer a partner. He was nothing, and he wouldn't realize it until it was too late. Allison was next. I had given her every chance to stop, to hesitate, to show some sign of guilt, but every night she came home to me like nothing had changed. She kissed me, she laughed at my jokes, she asked me about my day, even as she sent Trevor texts under the dinner table. I didn't confront her. I didn't give her the satisfaction of knowing I had seen through her lies. Instead, I made sure she walked straight into the fire with him. That Saturday, I planned a party, a company event, something we had done before, something that wouldn't seem out of place. I invited our employees, our investors, our business partners, people who had worked with us for years. People who trusted me, who had believed in the company I had built. Trevor and Allison arrived together, dressed for the occasion, acting as if nothing was wrong. I watched them work the room, smiling, shaking hands, playing their parts. I could see the excitement in Trevor's eyes. He thought this was his moment, that soon I would make the big announcement, that I would publicly acknowledge the shift in ownership. He kept glancing at me, waiting for it. And then I gave him something else instead. The lights dimmed, a hush fell over the room as a video screen flickered to life. At first, it looked like a slideshow, something normal, something expected. And then the audio kicked in. Trevor's voice, Allison's voice, the recording of them in the car, whispering, plotting. The one where they mocked me, the one where they talked about when to make their final move, the one where they said I was too loyal, too blind, too predictable to ever see it coming. I stood in the center of the room, my expression unreadable, as the truth unraveled in front of everyone. Trevor's smile vanished. Allison's face went pale. There was no way to explain this away, no way to spin it. The entire room was watching, listening. And I wasn't done yet. The room was silent, the kind of silence that only happens when something truly devastating unfolds in real time. It wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating, heavy with the weight of realization crashing down on the people standing at the center of it all. Trevor's face had drained of color, his usual smug confidence replaced by something I had never seen in him before. Pure, unfiltered panic. His eyes darted toward the exit, toward me, toward the screen where his own words were playing on repeat. Allison, standing just a few feet away, looked just as frozen. Her fingers clutched the stem of her champagne glass so tightly I thought it might snap in her grip. Her lips parted, and for a second I could see the wheels turning in her head, scrambling for an excuse, a way out, a lie that could somehow undo what had already been set in motion. But there was no way out. The video continued, filling the room with their betrayal in crystal clear sound. Trevor's voice, urgent, whispering about how they needed to move quickly. Allison's voice, casual, amused even, as she reassured him that I was too blind, too loyal, too trusting to ever see it coming. Their words echoed through the space like a confession neither of them had ever planned to give. I kept my expression unreadable, my hands clasped loosely in front of me as I stood in the center of the room, letting them drown in their own arrogance. I had no reason to intervene. Their voices, their plans, their deception, it was all playing out in front of an audience that mattered. Then the screen changed. A series of documents flickered into view, bank statements, wire transfers, offshore accounts. Every fraudulent transaction Trevor had orchestrated under my nose, every single dollar he had stolen from the company we built together. Then came the hotel receipts, the jewelry purchases, the carefully hidden expenses that traced back to Allison. I had spent weeks gathering this evidence, making sure there was no room for doubt. I wanted them to see, to understand just how much I knew. A murmur swept through the crowd, growing louder as the weight of the information settled in. People exchanged glances, disbelief written across their faces. I caught a few reactions in the crowd, board members shaking their heads, investors whispering to one another, employees looking sick at the realization of what had been happening behind closed doors. Someone let out a low whistle. Someone else muttered a curse under their breath. Trevor was the first to crack. His hands twitched at his sides, his breathing uneven. He took a step forward like he was about to address the room, then hesitated. "Greg, this is taken out of context." His voice was thinner than usual, the usual confidence nowhere to be found. "Come on, man, we can talk about this." I tilted my head slightly, watching him. "Talk about what, Trevor?" My voice was calm, controlled. "About how you've been siphoning money out of the company for over a year? About how you and my wife have been plotting behind my back? About how you thought I was too blind to notice?" His mouth opened and closed. He was scrambling, trying to calculate a response, but there wasn't one. He knew he was cornered. He just didn't want to admit it yet. This is a setup. You're twisting this. You can't prove anything." I almost laughed at how pathetic he sounded. "Can't I?" I gestured toward the screen. "Everything has already been sent to the legal department. The board has copies. The SEC has copies. Even the IRS will be getting a nice little package." I let that sink in before adding, "By the way, that contract you signed yesterday? It didn't give you more power in the company. It removed you from it entirely. You don't own a single share anymore. You have no authority here." Trevor's entire body tensed. His breathing had turned shallow, his eyes darting around the room like a caged animal searching for an escape route. I could see the exact moment he realized how thoroughly he had been played. He had no company, no money, no control. He had nothing. Then Allison moved. She turned to me, her face pale, her eyes glossy with something that might have been fear or regret or desperation, maybe all three. "Greg, please." Her voice was softer than I expected. "I never meant..." I held up a hand. "Don't." She flinched, just slightly, but I saw it. "You never meant for me to find out," I said quietly. "You never meant to get caught, but you did." Her chin trembled, and for a split second I saw the woman I had married, the woman I had once loved. But that woman had never really existed, had she? She had just been a version of herself she wanted me to see. And now that mask was slipping. "We can fix this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "There's nothing to fix," I said simply. "You made your choice. Now you get to live with it." For the first time since this started, real panic flashed in her eyes. She turned toward the crowd, maybe expecting someone to step in, to offer her an out, but no one did. She looked at Trevor, but he wasn't even paying attention to her anymore. He was still stuck in his own spiral, still trying to process the fact that everything he had worked toward had just been wiped out in a matter of minutes. I didn't give either of them another second of my time. I had done what I came here to do. Security had already been instructed to escort Trevor out of the building. His access to company accounts had been revoked. His name was already being erased from every document that mattered. By the end of the night, he wouldn't just be broke. He'd be under investigation. As for Allison, she would soon realize that the bank accounts she had been funneling money into were now frozen. The credit cards she relied on were canceled. The life she had planned for herself, the one where she walked away from me with everything, where she built a future on my name, my success, was slipping through her fingers. I didn't stay to watch what happened next. I walked out of that room, out of that building, out of that chapter of my life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I walked out of that building into the cool night air, my breaths steady, my mind clear. The echoes of gasps, murmurs, and whispers from inside the event hall still rang in my ears, but they felt distant now, like background noise to something far greater. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for weeks was gone, but in its place, there wasn't the rush of triumph I had expected. No satisfaction, no sense of fulfillment, just stillness, a quiet, hollow kind of emptiness that came in the aftermath of war. Because that's what this had been, a war, a battle fought in silence, in shadows, with patience and precision. And now that it was over, now that the dust was settling and my enemies lay defeated, I found myself standing in the wreckage, wondering what came next. Trevor had lost everything, his career, his reputation, his freedom. By the time he realized just how deep he was in, it was too late. The evidence I had compiled against him wasn't just airtight, it was a masterpiece. The fraudulent transactions, the offshore accounts, the shell companies used to launder money, every single detail had been documented, cross-referenced, and delivered into the hands of the right people. He had no way out. The board had already moved to strike his name from every company record, stripping him of any remaining authority. His accounts had been frozen, his assets were being seized, and with the formal complaints I had filed with the SEC and the IRS, it was only a matter of time before the legal system caught up with him. He had played his game well. He had been careful, methodical, covering his tracks in ways that might have fooled someone less experienced. But he had forgotten one thing. I built this company. I knew every contract, every system, every back door, and I had spent my entire career dismantling threats. Trevor was just another threat that had needed to be eliminated. Allison's downfall wasn't as immediate, but it was just as devastating. She tried to call me that night. I let the phone ring. When the calls turned to messages, I didn't read them. The next morning, she came to the house. I heard the sharp, desperate knock at the front door, the way her voice broke when she called my name. I let her knock, let her stand outside for 10 minutes, then 15, let her feel, for the first time, what it was like to be locked out. She had spent months lying to me, making me believe I was still the most important thing in her life, while she carefully built an escape plan. But what she hadn't planned for was what would happen when I took everything away from her. She wasn't just losing me, she was losing everything. She had spent the last few months secretly funneling money into private accounts, believing that when the time came she'd have a safety net. What she didn't realize was that those accounts had already been flagged and locked. The credit cards she had relied on were canceled. The expenses she had hidden, first-class vacations, luxury shopping trips, expensive jewelry, were all now being traced back to her as part of an internal investigation. She had made the mistake of thinking I wasn't watching, but I had been. I had seen every move, and now, when she needed an escape, she had nowhere left to run. The next time I saw her was in a lawyer's office. She sat across from me at the long conference table, her posture stiff, her fingers gripping the edge of the chair so tightly her knuckles were white. She had always been good at keeping her composure, at playing whatever role the moment required. But now, I could see the fear beneath the surface, the cracks forming in the carefully constructed version of herself she had always shown me. She looked at me, and for the first time in a long time, I saw something real in her expression. A plea, a desperate attempt to find some trace of the man she had once loved, to reach for the part of me that might still care. I didn't let her speak. The terms were simple. She would sign the divorce papers. She would walk away with nothing, no alimony, no settlement, no stake in the business, no rights to the house. She could contest it if she wanted to, but with the evidence I had compiled, evidence that not only proved infidelity but implicated her in Trevor's financial crimes, there wasn't a lawyer in the state who would take her case. She knew that, and I knew that. She picked up the pen with shaky fingers, staring at the papers in front of her. "Greg." Her voice cracked. I didn't answer. She swallowed hard, blinked rapidly, then pressed the pen to paper. And just like that, it was done. I left without saying another word. Afterward, I drove without a destination in mind. The city blurred past, familiar streets and landmarks passing in a haze. Everything looked the same, but I knew it wasn't. The life I had thought was real, the marriage I had believed in, the future I had planned, it had all been built on a foundation that no longer existed. I ended up at a bar, a quiet place on the edge of town where no one knew me, where I could sit with a drink in front of me and think. Did I feel victorious? Maybe. But it wasn't the kind of victory I had once imagined. There was no celebration, no rush of satisfaction, just the knowledge that I had taken back what was mine. That the people who had betrayed me had been left with nothing but the consequences of their own choices. And maybe that was enough. I finished my drink, left some cash on the bar, and stepped back out into the night. The air was cool, the streets alive with the sounds of a world that had kept moving, unaffected by the war I had just won. This wasn't the end. This was just the beginning.